Hello, everyone, and happy Thursday. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Hinkle. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Learning and Inclusion Manager at PFLAG National. Just like every week, I'm going to bring in Jean Marie Nevada, but Jean Marie, we're going to do it a little bit differently this time because I'm not going anywhere.
You're not going anywhere, Hinkle. This is going to be so exciting. Well, you're going somewhere and then you're coming back to me again. And I'm not even home, as you can see, because I have a mature background and not my normal chaos. So let me tell people about what we're going to do, and I will see you back in just a few minutes.
Sounds good.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. My pronouns are she and Aya, and I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. Every single Thursday, we get together to talk about something related to LGBTQ equality and inclusion, and this is no exception, but it's going to be a really fun show because it's a little different than we normally do. So let me do the housekeeping first. So we have an article for this week that was at the National Desk by Zachary Rogers. And the title was Pregnant Woman Replaced with Pregnant People on the CDC Flu Vaccine Advice website. And the article goes on to deal how some people are having a meltdown over the phrase pregnant people instead of pregnant women. I do want to note a couple of things about the article. It does note that this change actually happened in 2021, and it's just very recently that people have noticed it. So a little asleep at the wheel, my friends on the opposition. But also, I will also note that there is a alleged medical professional association that is cited in the article. And I do want to call out that that particular organization is not a valid organization. It is actually known for a lot of conspiracy theories, HIV denial, anti-vax attitudes. So I just wanted to be clear about sort of what is happening in this conversation. But essentially, the gist of the conversation is some people are really rattled by the fact that pregnant women has been replaced with pregnant people to reflect that not everybody who gives birth is female identified. So this actually got a conversation started at PFLAG about language. We have spent a lot of time talking about the words we choose to use, the words that are better to use to make everyone feel included, and also how language is constantly evolving. This has become such an issue for us, something that we talk about. I mean, issue in a positive way. We actually created a great resource, which we have given to you on our resource page, which is straightforequality.org/discussion series. Which is a handout that we do that's called So You're Presenting at PFLAG National, and it has some guidance on inclusive language. So we encourage you to check that out. But this has gotten a conversation started about linguistic inclusion, the evolution of language, how we can make people feel seen, and sometimes how we make them feel invisible by the words that we choose to use. So we were all feeling so passionate about this, we thought we would bring everybody in to have the conversation. So I am going to welcome back Jamie Hinkle, who you know and who you have met, but I am also welcoming in Liz Owen, our Director of Communications, and Jackson Alder, first time on the show, I believe, unless I'm forgetting, our new Senior Online Community Coordinator for PFLAG National. So welcome, my friends.
Hello.
And welcome,
Hello.
Jackson.
Hi.
Your first time at the party. This is
my first time.
Yeah, it's the official one, not the after hours one. We hope you'll enjoy it so much you'll come back for our fake show.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So let's get started on this conversation. So there has been a lot of conversation about language, and one of the things that we come back to a lot of the time at PFLAG is colloquialisms that have typically been seen as acceptable. Great examples of this are you guys. For those of you on the West Coast like me, the word dude, which is considered a gender neutral. And even when saying things like, hey, girl, hey, to a mixed room of people. So some people see these things as harmless. Some people see them as deeply offensive. So I want to get everyone's take on these terms, yay or nay. Hinkle, let's start with you.
Neither. I know that's not a good answer, but I think that a lot of it has to do with context. And I think that we're going to have this conversation that it is very different to me. We're in a professional setting when I am watching a training and somebody says, you guys, to a room full of hundreds and hundreds of people. And when I shoot my childhood best friend, who happens to be a cisgender man, a text that says, hey, girl, hey, as my opening line. Like there's important context to this. And so I think that for me, it's a neither, it's a both and it just really depends on sort of where you're sitting and the space that you're occupying and whether it is a long-term relationship, whether it is a professional setting, whether it's somebody you've just met, whether it's somebody who's actively told you, I don't like that phrase. Like, I think that it all depends on context for me personally, at least.
I like that. Jackson, what's your take?
I would have to agree with Jamie. And I personally don't use these colloquialisms. I stick with being from the South. I use y'all all the time. I am a y'all user. And folks, friends, I pretty much stick gender neutral, but I do think it is context based.
I have to admit that I couldn't find anything that worked for me, so I've gone with kittens because who doesn't love a kitten? And it is neutral. Liz Owen, hopefully you're going to disagree with us so I can have some conflict here. Can you fake your way
I
through it?
vehemently disagree. I don't disagree. I'm sorry. I'm actually on board with this. I will say that I'm much more aware of these changes of language now, and I do find it much more jarring when I hear other people using them because I'm so aware that I'm just aware of the rooms that I'm in and the spaces that I'm in. And so when I do hear someone using them without having asked for any context or to provide that context or being asked to provide that context, I do find it jarring. And I will also say that the term y'all actually used to really bother me. I found it to be very casual for a work setting. And I have evolved my own feelings on language like that to realize that it has come to be an inclusive term. There are good uses for it in work settings. And so I've also evolved on things like that too.
The South has won on this one. You've definitely won on this one. So, and I think it's really interesting that all of us talked about context. Part of this started for me. I was actually at a conference last year and the speaker was phenomenal, but she kept referring to the room as you guys to the point that it became such a distraction for me. On my notebook, I started doing tick marks every time she said you guys, and I stopped after 30. And it made me realize that this wonderful speaker who had so much good content to offer, I heard almost nothing because it had become absolutely maddening for me. And I have to say, she actually was fairly aggressive about the fact that she had no intention of not using you guys and that I needed to lighten up. So I'll never see her speak again. So that's how we fix it. So I want to know if you've tried to stop using them, because I think all of us have talked about context and being aware. How did you do that? And what are some of those alternatives? So Jackson, you mentioned y'all. Are there any other things that pop up for people?
Friends, folks, those are my two go-to. And I did used to say, hey, you guys, or hey, girl, hey. And same with Jamie, context, it still happens sometimes with close folks, but it does take a little adjustment, but that's part of language, is that it's always evolving and growing and becoming more inclusive. And that, I think, is one of the best things about language.
Yeah. I love the fact that you're acknowledging that it isn't a static thing, that this is, and this conversation may sound different in a year for all we know. Sorry, I interrupted you, I think, Jamie.
Oh, no, that is okay. I also think that I think about this in written communications, because in a lot of the emails that I'm sending professionally, more than one person is CC'd. There are multiple voices that are coming in and sort of chiming in on the things that have most impact on them. And I have started to think about every single time, do you address it to everybody that's CC'd? Is it a, hey, everybody, happy Tuesday? Like I try to not assume those sorts of things. And I will say, in written communications, it's another thing that I have what's perceived to be a gender neutral name. If something is addressed to me professionally as Mr. Henkel or Dear Sir, I immediately know that it's cold. I don't have to put priority on that, because my pronouns are on my professional bio on more than one website. It's on my email signature. It is on my LinkedIn profile. It is on it's everywhere. And so if you are addressing something to me as Mr. Henkel, you clearly haven't done your homework. And so it's something that I try to be very mindful of. And I think everybody and folks are the ones that I use most often when I'm speaking. Everybody and folks.
Liz, anything else on that?
Yeah, I would say, I use folks too. Although interestingly, I know there are a lot of people who use FOLX, and I've heard a lot from the disability community to not use that spelling because it can be difficult for people using readers, and that folks in and of itself is gender neutral. So the X can be complicated for people in the disability space. So I no longer use it with the X for that reason.
That's fascinating.
And of course, language evolves. Otherwise, my pronouns would be thee and thou. I think about this frequently, that this, the use of they and them, this constant barrage of, it is not a singular pronoun. Okay, it actually has been for centuries. And every time you say ooh, someone left their keys on the table. You have literally used their as a singular pronoun. So
Yeah.
we do it. We just don't get mad about it until we realize it's about people we don't support. And then it
Exactly.
becomes something else.
Exactly. I love that dictionary.com had actually tweeted out a couple of years ago in response to an actor who was being ridiculous. They pointed out that Shakespeare, Chaucer, Jane Austen all use they and them as singular pronouns. This is not new. So anyone who's crying about grammar literally doesn't know their grammar. So Liz, I want to talk about these meltdowns a little bit and where they're coming from. Because I know one of the things that I've seen you doing at PFLAG is evolving the language that we use to talk about things. The ways that we discuss things even 5 years ago are definitely different. And I've seen you starting to make some of these very affirmative choices, sort of like the pregnant people or people who parent or things like that. So this week's article really went into the meltdown by some people, I would say on the far right, around this. So let's talk about these changes because they didn't come automatically. We did have conversations about some of them. Do you think changes like this are warranted, and why, if you do?
I absolutely think they're warranted. And I think some of it is about, for us as PFLAG National as a whole, it's about organizational relevance, which I do think comes into play when you have these conversations. And really, it's the true of any community that wants to continue to support, that purports to want to continue to support the people they have always supported. If you are hearing from that community that anyone in that community is somehow being excluded by any language you are using, in order to continue to do the work you need and want to do and to remain relevant to do that work, you need to evolve with it. Evolution is not easy. Nobody said change is easy. Change is rarely easy, but if it is change that is good and worth it, and that will advance a mission or advance benefits to other people, I sometimes get frustrated by, but try to push my frustration to the side by this pushback of it's too hard. I can't possibly. There are so many ways in which we constantly change our language up to do these things. So I think in order for us to remain relevant, inclusive, and really continue to support the people we want to support, it has to evolve.
Yeah, I think that it definitely does. And I think, to your point that it's not easy, I think acknowledging that it's not easy is a really big thing. That this does mean sometimes breaking ourselves out of patterns that we have used our entire lives. That's nothing to kind of just shake off. It actually does take this conscious effort. And I think sometimes that fear of I'm going to mess it up becomes paralyzing for people. And that's why it's so important that we coach them through, what do you do when you mess up? Because you will, because you're a human being, to the best of my knowledge. Can we name any other examples of where language has evolved over time? I know that one that really jumped out for me was the people first language model, which is still acceptable in some places, not acceptable in others. I was actually doing a presentation and somebody said to me, when you're talking about autistic people, that you need to actually flip this and explain the whole history of it. Jackson, do you have any examples of that maybe that you'd want to bring up?
I was actually just thinking about the person first language and also how we don't use terms like insane to talk about people anymore, because it's not nice to put it to put it plainly. It's not nice. Or things like differently abled or handy-capable, or languages like that to talk about people with disabilities. Like we've evolved and learned from folks in those communities who say, "Hey, please don't do that. That don't describe me like that." And we learn and evolve.
Yeah. Jamie, I know that you and I had talked about a couple of things related to self-harm, and could you explain that?
Yeah. I mean, there are things around mental health that very much come up for me that I remember very vividly. I was presenting a workshop at an event, and I said something, and the way that I phrased it was not the best practice at the time. And somebody gently called me out and say, when you say something like successfully committed suicide, that makes it seem like it is this crime and it adds all this stigma. And so the way a lot of people are talking about that now is someone who died by suicide. And like, it was just one of those light bulb moments for me where it was like, I was so grateful that person had taken the time to gently say, I know where that came from. I know why you said it that way. This is why it's not preferred, or this is why we don't phrase it like that anymore. This is the best alternative. And it's something that has stuck with me for a very, very long time. I mean, I vividly remember that experience. And I think, so I'm somebody who lives in Portland, Oregon, and just like many major cities in the United States, we are experiencing a pretty significant problem with tent cities and people experiencing homelessness. And hearing that shift in language from a homeless person to a person experiencing homelessness or a houseless person is something that I am seeing right now in my community, and seeing that evolution and seeing how it changes the way we talk about potential solutions and what this might look like moving forward. And so it's been a really neat thing to watch happen in real time in my community.
You know, I have to, as you were talking about these two things, you were telling stories along with them. And I think those stories are so interesting and so powerful about how you came to know this. And I think when we use this language and somebody says, well, why are you doing it? I think when we tell these stories, they also show a level of cultural humility. I didn't always get it right. And somebody was kind enough to bring this to my attention. And here's why I do it now. I think it's so fascinating. And it's not just a do it this way, no explanation. Liz, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about what the two, you and Jackson were talking about earlier in the disability space, that, you know, one of the things I love about saying disabled people is that you take that the negative connotation about the word disabilities and disabled, like any language can have a negative connotation, but when you use that language the way people impacted with that language want you to use it, then you are empowering people to be called what they want to be called. And it's the same with pronouns. And I will say it's one of the places that I've had the biggest evolution of language that I continue to stumble on, is saying things like, when I'm working through a plan for something, let's walk through this together. And I immediately correct myself and say, I'm really sorry. Let's work through this together. Yes. It is one that, much like some people use the word guys, that is one that I continue to stumble on, but there's never been a time in the last few months where I haven't stopped, apologized, and rephrased for just the reasons we're talking about.
You know, from you, I actually learned about being conscious of using things like stand up for whatever, because again, the stand up it assumes ability to do that, and that is not necessarily the case for everyone, and finding alternatives to that. It's amazing. Once you learn it, you learn it. So one last question on this. You know, we talk a lot about what do you do when somebody doesn't react well to what you're saying. So how do you handle it when somebody really vehemently pushes back? I mean, in this case, the example that I'd actually like to put out there for us to respond to is when somebody says that saying pregnant people erases women. What does that conversation sound like? Because flipping tables is not an option, Jamie.
Yeah, you saw my snigger. I mean, I think that when I hear that, I'm like, well, what women? Because I'm women and it doesn't erase me. And I think that trying to pull apart what is actually being claimed, what is being said, this is erasing women. What do you mean by that? Where did you get that idea? What women are you talking about? Like, what do you mean is one of the ways that I try to address that really harsh pushback. And that can be tough. It can be tough not to get warm in your cheeks and to want to flip the table over, but it is something that I try to do. And I don't know, Liz or Jackson, if you have anything that you would add to that.
Jackson?
I would. So I try to be educational. I try to relate. And so my own personal story is that I have the parts to get pregnant. I'm trans and non-binary and was assigned female at birth. And so I am part of those pregnant people, or could be. And I try to use that as kind of the education of, you know what, I'm not a woman. You can look at me and you can see not a woman. And so this is being more inclusive for me and folks like me. And that, how is that bad? You know, where nobody is being erased, everybody is being included.
Yeah, I love that. Liz, anything else on that one?
I was going to say flip tables, so maybe my answer would be better served for another conversation. No, I was
after dark.
I love the educational model. I really love, Jamie, I love those open-ended questions. Like, can you say more about that? What do you mean by that? Because it really forces people to have to think, and they might come back with, well, I don't want to talk about it. But I do think there is something about asking the question that is really, really smart. And then, of course, there's the other side of it too. Jackson and I were in a training together, and there was someone who kept saying it over and you guys over and over again. And I had not provided this packet that we created, and I was able to provide it to them later. And I got an email back thanking us for doing that, and that they're now so much more aware of when they are doing it. And I think that kind of pushback can make a difference.
I agree with you. One of the things, because Jamie and I spend a lot of time training and teaching, and one of the questions that almost always comes up is, how do you know which word you're supposed to use? There are so many alternatives. I mean, I this morning we were teaching a class and somebody asked me why I use the word queer to describe myself, even though my attractions are primarily for women. And I had that opportunity to explain it. And I love having that opportunity to explain it, because I think every time we tell those stories, we're both educating people, but we're also opening a new world to people. We're giving them a possibility model that maybe didn't exist previously. And that always excites me. So I'd like to do a quick round on this. How do you know what is the best word to use to describe someone's identity? Because certainly when we say LGBTQ, that is not sufficient. A person is not simultaneously LGBTQ. Who wants to go first on this one?
I can go. I, whenever possible, ask. Because as somebody who also uses they, them pronouns, I feel seen and respected if somebody says, hey, what are your pronouns? I want to get it right. If I'm not able to ask in a situation, then I tend to stick with gender neutral language until I know, until they've given me a cue.
I love that. Jamie, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it also has a lot to do with listening and with mimicking the language that people use to describe themselves. And Jean Marie, I have shared this anecdote with countless audiences that we have worked with. But when it comes to some language, some inclusive language like partner or spouse or significant other, I think it's really powerful and meaningful to use language like that when you aren't sure how somebody identifies or how they would define their own relationship. But Jean Marie had to get married 3 different times until her marriage was recognized by her state and her federal government. And the word wife, I think, or I've understood, has a lot of power for you. And so I shouldn't turn around and call Jude your partner for the sake of making myself feel more inclusive. I need to mimic the language you use to describe yourself and your own relationship. And I think that a lot of that, again, has to do with context. It has to do with listening. Like Jackson said, it sometimes has to do with asking. And again, Jean Marie, you are somebody who has shifted to using the word queer to describe yourself. And I think there was a time where I was like, I've noticed this, what's going on? And
we had the conversation.
We talked about it. And so asking that question and listening and really paying attention to how people talk about themselves and how they relate to the world is really meaningful and powerful for me.
Not that anyone was wondering, but I did have 3 separate dresses, 3 distinctly different dresses. Liz, what about you? How do you figure it out?
I'm mostly laughing because I think you evolving to use the word queer basically allows you to describe your attractions to mostly women and Idris Elba. And I think that's the only way you can capture that appropriately.
Thank you. Thank you.
I actually just want to say, Jamie, I want to harness and bottle and distribute what you just said about, I don't want to take how you put it eloquently. I'm going to go back and watch this video later about how in order to make yourself seem more inclusive, you exclude a term that empowers someone else. That's so deep. I need to sit with it for a minute.
That it really is. It's excellent. And I think it's something we tend to see with a lot of well-intentioned people, kind of going a little bit over the top. So we have 2 more questions. And I think we can I want to jump to this one, which I think is really important. How do you handle it when you don't get it right? Because I mentioned that when we are teaching, one of the things that comes up the most is people's paralyzing fear of making errors. We certainly teach a process of what an apology should sound like. But I'd be interested to hear from this group where people are in that. And Jackson, maybe we could start with you on this one.
Absolutely. I correct myself and move on. And I try not to make a big deal over it, because I feel like that is the worst thing that you can do, is to blow it up, make it a huge thing. Just correct yourself, make a mental note of, okay, gonna get this right. Maybe say it again so that you know and are correcting yourself out loud so the person knows, and then move on.
I love that. Liz, what about you?
Same. And I just to expand a little bit on the not blowing it up piece, especially because then there is a almost a burden put on the other person that you are in dialogue or conversation with. So it was my error. It was my mistake. Now I'm going to correct it to the point that the other person who I harmed unintentionally, though it may have been, to comfort me in telling me it was okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. And then the dynamic has reshifted to further harm.
I think that's an interesting way of framing it, because we talk about the importance of centering the apology, not yourself. But I really like the way you phrase that and the way you explain that, because I think we don't always get to exactly what that dynamic is. Hinkle, you get the last word on this question.
I do. And I think that I'm going to admit that oftentimes when I don't get it right, it's not until I'm at home overthinking the situation by myself and thinking to myself, oh, did I mess that up? One of the things that I am struggling with and trying to get better at right now is using words like crazy and insane and lunatic and those sorts of things. And it's not until I'm watching TV later that night that I think to myself, oh my God, I think I used the word crazy like 8 times in that conversation. And so I have tried to make a commitment to send a person that message, apologize the next time I'm with a particular group. You know, if it's been a one-on-one conversation at work, I might shoot somebody a G-chat and just say, I'm really sorry. I've been trying to get better at that. So it's still the sort of apologizing and moving on. But for me personally, it is very rarely in the moment because I've got to sit and overthink it a little bit until I realize the mistake that I've made, which is also why I am so appreciative of those moments where people do gently call me out and they gently say, hey, we don't talk like that here, or this is why you should phrase that differently. Like, I appreciate it so much in that moment, because I'm somebody that doesn't often recognize the mistake until a day or two later when I'm trying to fall asleep and overthinking a conversation that happened a couple days ago.
I first of all, I want to, on behalf of all introverts who are listening to you talk about thinking about it hours later, thank you for saying that, because we all do that. And it is a horrifying experience as you count the hours until you can apologize live. But I really appreciate what all of you are saying. And I think I appreciate the fact that everybody here has conceded we haven't always gotten it right. And that this is a journey for all of us, and that we are figuring it out as we go along. I think there really is an importance to giving people grace and that gentle calling out versus going on the attack the first time, because it really can be that moment that determines if somebody's going to get it right next time or if they're going to build up a resentment to this conversation. Mm-hmm. So I am really grateful to all of you for having this conversation. We were really excited about it. We normally don't sort of bring everybody on staff in to do this, but I thought each one of us were bringing a different piece of the discussion, and that makes it a lot more fun. So thank you all for doing this today. I appreciate everything you do, and especially what you've done in sort of forging this conversation in the communication space and in the learning space where I think a lot of people absorb it.
Thank you, Jean
Yeah,
Marie.
thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We will be back next week with another fantastic program for you. I just want to really encourage you to check out this week's article, but also check out the 2 great resources that we've listed for you. As I mentioned, we have made PFLAG's presenter handout available to everybody as a quick download, as a PDF. There's also a great article that was in the New York Times Magazine entitled, Y'all, the Most Inclusive of All Pronouns, which we kind of left. So definitely check those out at straightforequality.org/discussion series. We wrap up the exact same way every single week, reminding you to do 3 important things. First of all, to run fast. Second, to laugh hard. And most of all, to be kind. And that is really important as we get into these conversations about language and how we can instantly make somebody be seen or feel invisible too. There's a lot at stake here. It's not just about grammar. It never was. Bye, everyone.